Hi, and welcome to a small, medium, at large podcast. I'm your host, Gail Hyson, bringing you intimate interviews beyond normal boundaries. I want to thank all of you listeners for subscribing. We're at over 1,300 subscribers now. For liking, sharing, commenting, sticking with us for the last 3 years when we first started our show. We're up into the 80s now on our guests. We've got our guest number 85, 86 coming along. I want to, as always, thank my son Richard and my daughter Nancy because they produce and post this show for us. And that's why you're able to find us on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and other social media sites. So today, let me tell you about our special guest. Reed A. Morrison, PhD, is a licensed psychologist practicing clinical psychology and depth psychotherapy. He was, for 30 years, a private practitioner in Jungian-oriented psychotherapy, specializing in the treatment of addiction and trauma. In addition, he co-founded and directed a public drug treatment program in Baltimore City, founded and directed a regional employee assistance program, founded and operated a national drug-free workplace company, and served on the psychiatry faculty of the University of Maryland School of Medicine. Dr. Morrison holds certifications as a master addictions counselor and a certified addiction specialist. During graduate school in the 1970s, his mentors were psychedelic treatment researchers at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center. He is a grandparent of 3 and currently retiring after 40 years. The inner life has long been a living presence in his life and practice. Cultivating and applying inner life experience for healing has been central to his professional work. Along these lines, he has more recently focused on the use of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy while a research psychologist at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research during the 2019 to 2022 years. He now consults, mentors, and lectures on a part-time basis. He has received many awards and has participated in research, authored online accredited courses, as well as done many publications, presentations, and workshops. In 2023, his book, A Grandchild's Guide to the Journey, was published. So let's welcome Reed here today. Welcome, Reed.
Thank you very much, Gail. It is a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you here today, and we hope all our batteries will hold up through the time that we need to have our talk here today.
Right, and it's not
So
a
I want to
pacemaker
thank,
either.
yes,
Sorry.
I want to thank Stanley Krippner and Jean Fox for sending me a copy of your book and for us scheduling our little show here today. I always start off with the beginning, so it's your beginning. As a child growing up, were you fortunate to grow up and be influenced by your grandparents? And did you know them all? And did they inspire you from this past to do the work you're doing today?
Boy, yes, yes, and yes. I knew my grandparents, and they were just phenomenal people. They were people who came over from Eastern and Central Europe in the early 1900s. My mother's side was from the 1850s, and so they had to make lives for themselves. And they couldn't rely on any help, on any institutions. And they were very lively, aware people. And my grandmother in particular, paternal grandmother, was a painter. She read tea leaves. She danced on tables. I would go to her house, and they'd always have incense burning in little Buddhas. I mean, it was so yeah. These were wonderful people.
That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah.
And did you grow up where they lived near you, so you got to
Not
be with
not
them as you were growing up?
not too near me. It was maybe an hour drive away, but I got to visit a
Oh,
lot, which was, and I still feel their influence. So that's more important, and that was part of the reason for writing my little book.
I'm very grateful to have been able to grow up with both sets of grandparents and know them until my adult years. And unfortunately, a lot of children don't have this now. I get calls sometimes where people ask, could you just come in and be a pretend grandma in a classroom for a child who has no grandparents present, you know? And so some of them really don't get that special bond that we all got.
Right, right,
And I feel like this is part of our American culture. We don't support our aging families. We put them away in places so that people don't even see what's happening to them as they grow
right.
old. And
Yes.
yet, when you go to the Mongolian culture, which I've been to, and the Filipino culture, which I've been to,
Mm.
there an elderly person is respected and honored and always greeted first with a special greeting. And in our culture, I don't see that in our culture.
No, we don't. We don't. But in my sort of Jungian depth background, we recognize that the grandparent, the grandfather, the grandmother, they're the mediators to the great father and the great mother. So it's the link to the spiritual world, and that was part of the impetus for writing a book that would hopefully, uh, uh, give my own grandchildren a cue for uh, or an entree to a spiritual life.
This was my next question, so that's part of the answer. If we
Mm.
could go in a
Okay.
little depth more about when and why you decided to write this book, and was there a pivotal
Mm.
moment where you had like an aha, I need to do this?
Well, the aha was I'm 74 years old, and I'm probably not going to get younger, and people around me were writing memoirs, and I know that and I know Stanley has a wonderful memoir, but I wanted something that would be directed to, and particularly my grandson, who just turned 17, but he was like, 15 or 16 when I wrote this. Uh, and I looked around on Amazon and bookstores, and there were plenty of books about how to be a grandparent, what a grandparent should do, how they should act, but nothing about how to be a grandchild. And uh, and kids sort of the book is really intended for preteen and above. This is not for little kids. This is not to read to your 4-year-old. But
Mhm.
it's uh, let me think where I was going with that thought. Uh, it's really directives for how to begin a life journey. And I didn't want to write like a guru book or I don't know what, a dilettante book. I just wanted to be very plain and simple. And here's what you can do. Here's what I learned along the way. And I feel it's my duty to pass along to the next generation or generations, and give them something. So sort of hand off the baton. So that's what I tried to do.
I uh, I think this is such an important piece that you did, and I actually wanted it to go a little further. I
Yeah.
felt like, is he going to write
Uh-huh.
a part two book, or
Well,
could we just get a little? There was this. You're touching on such important subjects,
right,
and also possibly something like that should be written for a little younger age, minus some of the things maybe about sexuality that comes up or things that
right.
maybe not
Mhm.
directed, but opening up children and teenagers to something I want to speak a lot about here, which is the inner life.
Right, right. And I think that's the reason that I did not want to be too specific with the book, and why a number of people, a friend has said, what about book two? And go into it with greater detail. I don't want that. I want book two, if there is one, to come from the reader's psyche.
Mhm.
So there's suggestions and pointers, but the rest is up to them. I want them to follow in their imagination, in their dreams, their reveries, and find their way. Um, so that was intentional.
And well, this is also something that in at least I went through public school, so I can't speak for Waldorf or Montessori schools, but in the
Mm.
public school system in New York, where I went through school, there's and when my children went through public schools here in California, there is nothing, even though it may be a little bit more open here, there's nothing discussed about compassion, about living a life that's caring and in service of others, about doing things that it seems like what we're just taught in school, which I dropped out of at 15, so I can't talk beyond that. But it was filled with more things of such a negative nature in how to compete, how to be the best, or how to be the number one. It didn't teach you about being caring to your other friends in the class or being caring to kids that maybe have hardships that are sitting in that classroom. Instead, you
Yeah,
experience bullies and, well, at
yeah,
least I did, but I'm just saying it seems to me that these things should be in the curriculum of school education.
yeah.
I don't
But
know what you're feeling about that.
well, I think as I was looking for a book, I didn't really want to write a book. I wanted to give a book to my grandson, and I couldn't find one. I found many books that told uh, kids what not to do. Don't do this. Don't do drugs. Don't do on and on and on. Stay out of trouble. Blah blah blah. But not telling them what to do or how to do it. Not pointing a direction that's a positive direction. So I hear you on that completely.
And so when you did give this book to your grandson, what happened? Was there a
Well, I gave it to him, and then about a year later, I said, "His name is Van. It's not Van Morrison, unfortunately.
oh my man,
That's
I
his
just
last
saw
name."
him a couple weeks ago,
Uh, uh,
79 and sing
uh,
Moon Dance like it
uh,
was just yesterday.
he's
I'll send you the
wonderful.
clip. I'll
Oh,
send you the
please.
clip.
Oh, that would be great. Anyway, so I said, Van, did you read the book? He said, no. I said, what do you mean no? He said, I don't have to. He said, I'm going to keep this book with me my whole life. So
Oh,
carries it around in his back pocket, I think.
oh, that's so
Yeah, yeah,
wonderful.
yeah.
So he was a sensitive teenager, willing to,
He is. He really is. He's a wonderful young man. He's great.
and
And
so was he able to maybe share any of that with his friends or
in that I don't know. I'm going to be seeing him in a few days, so I'll take that question to him. But I hope so. That would be nice. Yeah.
yes. And have you thought of like distributing that book anywhere to like other therapists' offices or young
Mhm.
teenage areas with teenagers in need or
Yeah. Well, I haven't done any marketing at all, and mainly because I just retired and I now have some time.
Mhm.
And I'd like to get the book out there, not because I'm looking for another career. God knows I am not. Uh,
Right.
uh, uh, but I think the book may have a message or messages that would be valuable for kids and for parents and for everyone. And in the before inside the book, I wrote, "We are all grandchildren," and we are. It doesn't matter how old we are or if our grandparents are still alive, but we're still grandchildren.
And in my beliefs, I feel they're still watching over us and that we can also still connect to them on a spiritual level for guidance or support
Right.
when we realize that they've never really left us. It's only their body that's gone.
I love that. Thank you. Yes, I agree.
Um, so could you share with our listeners some of the basic concepts or methods for navigating a life journey directed by an
Yeah.
inner life, but we first need to explain to them what your definition of an inner life means.
Yeah, yeah. Let me back up a little bit.
Sure.
What I didn't include was another reason why I wrote the book. And I think
Yes.
at this age that I am, and many people, lots of cohorts, and that it's important to finish life. I don't mean dying necessarily physically, but there's things that need to finish. And part of the finishing is passing on what you've gathered through a lifetime. And so part of my reason for writing this, I'll put as much in sort of a vague and suggesting way into this book, and that'll help me to finish. So this will help my grandson Van and other grandsons and granddaughters out there. But it was very important to me to feel like that I'm finishing my life in a way that has meaning.
Yes. And also, it isn't just by making sure you leave the ring that your grandfather wore to
Right.
pass down. It's not
Exactly.
just physical. I mean, material things are sentimental and are a wonderful thing to pass on. I'm not saying they're
Right.
not,
Mm, mm.
but wisdom and knowledge of life's experience
Right.
and sharing that in some families they don't share the stories and
Yeah.
the generations don't know what their grandparents went through
Right,
or their
right.
families.
Yeah, yeah. I um I had an experience in the first grade that may have been intimation or a first experience of an inner life. I was out in the hallway. The whole class, for some reason, lining up in the hallway. You know, there's a lot of lining up in grade schools, and all the boys were just piling on top of each other. It was like a mountain. They were just running and it's really aggressive. And so I started doing it too. And there I was piling on, and all of a sudden something said to me. I don't mean said in a way that I heard voices, but something said in an inner way, you don't have to do this. You don't have to be an animal. There are different ways to live. So I got myself off the pile and I stood back and I watched all these kids still, throwing themselves at each other. And I think in some ways my life began at that moment.
I believe you.
Yeah, yeah,
And that inner voice uh is I find for me, and that's advice I give other people, is to start listening to that inner voice.
yeah.
More that you acknowledge the voice, the stronger the voice becomes, and it's not like a whisper. It can become a much more louder voice that you hear
Right.
directly.
Yes. And we can dialogue with that voice,
Hmm.
which I think is very important. And it's important in psychotherapy with active imagination, but and anybody can do that. And that 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 uh that gives our lives uh, I don't know, an aspect of depth, and and other that we might not otherwise have. Other being that there's that that all that is real is not what we can see and feel and touch.
Right.
The and uh, and I know Jung called the other really the collective unconscious. That there's a whole that we're heirs to a whole evolution of consciousness, that sometimes visit us at night in dreams, or maybe in psychedelic experiences, or synchronicities, that sort of thing. Um, so yeah,
I every time I've had three children, and each time, and they were decades, each one was a decade. Every decade I had a child, one in my 20s, one in my 30s, and one in my 40s.
good for you.
And each time I would get a visit from my grandma Schneider, who would come to me in a dream, and
Yeah,
she would do something strange like throw fish on me or some kind of different thing. And I would wake up and know that I would then be pregnant.
right.
Um,
Wonderful. That
yes.
is great.
So back with the why you were writing this book,
Yeah.
is there anything more you want to say about the things that motivated you to do this, or should we go
Um,
on to the inner?
I don't know, other than when I started writing it, I've written a lot of academic articles, as people in my position tend to do, and they're
Yes.
just painful to write. And this just came right through. I was like I was taking dictation,
Hmm.
and it probably wrote it in about five or six sittings that were about 20 minutes long. So it was very easy and it just flowed. So yeah,
That I always feel like that's the knowingness
yeah,
when this it just comes through you. Like I always think of it as imagining like it's a source from up here and it's just coming through like this and then it's just
right.
coming out.
Yes.
And I trust that information.
Yeah, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so so explain to our listeners what is, you know, do we all have the same definition of what an inner life is, or what do you think, what are the methods and concepts for navigating a life journey directed by an inner
Yeah,
life?
yeah. Well, I hope we don't have all the same concepts.
Mhm.
I think uh, when we think we should that our concept should congeal with somebody else's concept, then we get into the sort of the guru area, which is uh, that I have to be like someone else. There's a pressure to conform, and it what it does is shuts off the inner exploration. And uh, I think that there's a lot of copying going on. I'm thinking of Jung's Red Book that's so wonderful and inspiring, and that a lot of people are now dialoguing with Philemon or whoever their Philemon is, and uh, it has to be our own. We can be inspired uh, by great people like Jung and like Stanley Krippner, but it has to be our own.
Right. So our own inner voice is going to take us down our own inner path.
I hope so. Yes. Yeah.
And so, did you teach that when you were working with patients in situations? Did you teach them about getting in touch with their inner
Well,
being?
not in a precise and certainly not in a prescriptive way.
Mhm.
I think when a therapist does that and tells a client, this is what you should be doing, and this is that again, we're cutting off the creative process. But sometimes things would come up in a dream, and I would encourage a dialogue with it. And so the discovery of an inner life and inner voice would become theirs. And that's when it's powerful. I greatly believe that, strongly believe that. Yeah. Uh,
And teenagers, some of them are hard to get through because at the teenage mind, you think you know everything.
yeah. Yeah.
So, how uh, how would you approach a teenager to explain to them about it? I mean, they may think, "What do you mean inner life?" How would
Yeah.
you explain
Yeah.
that to them?
Yeah. Well, I think and sometimes dreams are a way into that conversation
Mhm,
because we all have them. And I think that kids really like dreams. They're entertained by them. No one knows what a dream is. I mean, scientists can say, well, this is what's going on neurologically, uh, but really, what a dream, where it comes from, what it is a great mystery. And kids love mysteries, and helping them to see that when we go to sleep at night, we're inviting an incredible mystery. And not to, and I really caution people in my practice as well as in this book, you don't have to interpret it. You don't have to say it means this or it doesn't mean this. Accept it, welcome it in, follow it, talk to it, paint it, whatever you can do, and see where it takes you. And so that's worked out well for me and for a number of other people.
Yeah, Stanley's done incredible work back in the 50s at Maimonides on dream work.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
It's come a long way since
right.
what
And
they.
when I talked to him last, I reminded him of how we first met. And I was at that point, I had just come back from India, which is a whole other story. And I was living in a commune where I met my wife. And I decided in India that I didn't meet a guru there. I didn't do, but what did happen to me there was a real awakening. There was so much poverty there that I could see myself clearly as a sort of a middle class hippie slumming through India. And
Mhm,
that did not feel good. So that really woke me up. I stopped doing the drugs that I was doing at the time, decided I wanted to be a psychologist, try to understand what this whole mystery is about. And I found out about Humanistic Psychology Institute, which was the original name for Saybrook. And I somehow got in touch with Stan Krippner, who invited me for an interview at Maimonides Dream Laboratory in Brooklyn. And
mhm.
so then I said to my wife, my gosh, here I am. I better get shoes. I better get, I better get a shirt that's not just a ripped t-shirt. And so I got a shirt and I probably got pants and I got his new shoes. And I got on a train, went to Brooklyn, somehow found my way to the hospital and the dream laboratory and sat in a little waiting area. And I was nervous. And Stanley's book, The Song of the Siren, had just come out. And I was so impressed with this man. And I thought, oh my God, what's he going to think of me? Well, he came out and we were wearing the same shirt and the same shoes.
Oh!
And as my memory has it, which may or not be accurate, he said to me, "Okay, you're in." So I was accepted at that moment. So his memory might be different and might be better than mine usually. So anyway, so those kind of things, those kind of sort of
Synchronicities.
yeah, these meaningful coincidences of synchronicities, I've learned to pay a lot of attention to. And I had a wonderful mentor my whole or much of my career, Norman Bradford. I like to mention his name because he's such an important man who was a Jungian, but was mostly a mystic, a nature mystic, and he was able to uh, uh, follow nature and its connection to the soul, and he taught me so much. So anyway, so Stanley also uh, introduced me to the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center and the LSD experiments that were going on then. So some of those psychologists at the time became my mentors in my program, and in the last few years it went full circle because some of them were still in the field. I'm thinking of Bill Richardson in particular, uh, who was at Hopkins when I was there.
Did you
Yeah,
did you meet Timothy Leary back in those days?
I did not. I
Ah,
did,
oh,
no,
what about Robert Anton Wilson?
no.
No.
I was not. I think that, especially when I got back from India, I was really very open and almost too open. So I was a little bit protective, and
Hmm.
and so I didn't want to. I wanted to have some, at least, semblance of control in terms of opening up consciousness. So I didn't do any more. I did lots of LSD and mescaline in college, and one trip in particular was really seminal in that I experienced. Uh, I remember what my thought was at the time. Maybe it was an inner voice. I don't know that the body is a crude carrier of consciousness. So I was able to experience really, I think, pure consciousness at that point, and that really influenced me to become a psychologist, to go into the field. And I started with another person a drug abuse treatment program based on the assumption that what people were at the basis of addiction was a desire for transcendence. So we started an experiential group therapy program that went on for 10 years, but it went on. It was 12-week sessions, and each session had a theme of one of the archetypes of the zodiac. So in the first week, we do everything with who am I and that sort of thing, and what do I need, and then the second week, and on and on. And we did music therapy, art therapy, dance therapy, meditation, yoga, whatever was going on at the time, we were doing, and it was really one of the very early uh, uh, IOPs, the intensive outpatient programs. Um, and it was incredible. So I directed that and participated in it for 10 years. And
And
that was my dissertation project. Yeah.
the LSD back when you were in college
Right.
and when I was 14 was when I had my first mescaline trip in New York. And
Oh.
right after my seen a therapist, I'd left my therapist office and dropped the mescaline right after I got out of his office. And went down to Manhattan with my boyfriend, and we had the time of our lives that I would never suggest anyone ever doing that sort of a thing. But we felt
Right.
like we were in a little shielded bubble and we could be on the train and in the center of one of the biggest cities in the world and feel completely protected, even though we were tripping
Uh,
our asses off. But I that that went until I was 17, and then I never did any more psychedelics again,
right.
except when I was exposed to peyote in the mountains of Mexico with the Huichol Indians at a peyote ceremony, that I
Yeah.
felt I had to take it just to be participative, but never enough to, really be tripping.
Right.
And then I tried a hit of mescaline in my late 30s, I think, or early
Yeah.
40s once. And what I learned from it was that, and it was my husband and I, and we went out into my orchard here and we were running around in the orchard and we had this lovely experience together. But I realized that all of the things I had been experiencing since the last time I'd taken a psychedelic was the same. That I was able to access all these, I don't know if you want to call them worlds, or I don't know, other realms or other places that are not necessarily in the body, but
Right.
outer places, or when you talk about imaginations and things. So I was able to do all of this stuff for many years, precognitive dreaming, remote viewings,
Mm.
tremendous amount of psychic phenomena research work and things, but I never did any drugs. When I
Hmm.
took that one mescaline trip, I said, "Oh my God, this is exactly like what it's like doing the things that I'm doing without the drug."
But I think that I'm not sure we need to. When I was at Hopkins, people would say, "Oh, you must be tripping all the time." I said, "No, I hadn't done it in decades." And sometimes we only need one experience. If
Right.
one experience can open us, open up the psyche, and repetition is not. It doesn't really matter. Sometimes it's not needed.
And so tell me what's going on in because I've been in, I was at Woodstock. I've been in this whatever you want to call the hippie world thing or whatever
Right.
these things
Yeah.
for all these years. And I have all these people coming to me, and some of them who've like they're not pot smokers or any of this, but they're all investigating microdosing with mushrooms now. And this seems to be
Yeah.
very popular, and supposedly a lot of people are getting having assisted therapies. And from your point of view, what do you think about that? And have
Oh
you seen
boy.
any
Yeah.
results, or is it a big can of worms, or what's going on out there?
Well, I can definitively say I don't know. And,
Uh-huh.
and I mean, microdosing is, I think there's a big study going on now, but the previous studies have said that it's no better than placebo, whether that's true or not. But placebo is pretty good. If we can activate the immune system and that's wonderful. I think that when the psychedelic renaissance began, that sort of a mad rush for this for using and sometimes using irresponsibly. The therapeutic, the psychotherapeutic underground had some catastrophes to it, um, but my my issue with it, if I can call it an issue, is that there's a lot of emphasis on the drug itself and not so much on the experience and the person. When I was a guide at Hopkins, I really tried to make a connection with the person, we call it, they were the volunteers. Did they have an inner life? What brought them to this? Uh, it wasn't so much that they're going to take a pill, and uh, and by the way, they were the blue pills, another kind of blue pill, uh,
Yeah.
and and uh, and it was going to cure their depression. I was working in a depression study, uh, so I guess I, I'm not so sure where this is where it's all going. I'm sure you know that MDMA was just sort of turned down by the FDA, was really unfortunate. I was part of a training group that we were doing MDMA training for the LA Veterans Administration. But the day before, the FDA had shut down, did not approve of MDMA. So that was an interesting 8 hour experience. But I don't know. So what I saw in uh, as a guide is that some people had amazing healing experiences.
Mhm.
They just made tremendous discoveries. A lot of their old symptoms were going away, sometimes immediately. Um, the studies didn't follow up people long enough, I don't think. But there have been other. I think NYU had large follow-ups, long follow-up periods. So it can do amazing things. And some people didn't have great experiences, or they had very frightening experiences. So it depends upon the person, what they're bringing to it, why they're doing it. Um, uh, the
And what I always thought was very important was, the atmosphere of where you were in. And when
oh yeah,
I've seen these studies, they're in like a hospital bed or like a room with no window. I don't know. And
yeah,
all I could think to myself was, gee, if that was where I was doing that drug, I would
right.
want to run out of there as fast as possible. How can they have a positive experience being in this little hospital bed thing?
Right. And,
With
and yet and yet people had incredibly positive experiences. It wasn't a hospital bed, it was at least at Hopkins. It was a couch and it was a beautifully decorated room and
oh,
the environment was a sacred one. We used a chalice to give them the medication. Um,
oh.
And the blindfolds and the music, they're there really to for study purposes. Because if we had people going out walking in the park, you couldn't control where they went and who they ran into. So controls and studies are very important, but also to really direct the person inwardly.
Mhm.
And I think that was effective. We didn't have anybody who really complained about the blindfolds and uh, eye shades, really, not really blindfolds.
And
Um,
also, wasn't this like I know the strain, I never took a whole hit of acid back in the 60s. I would only take a quarter, the most
right.
was half,
Yeah.
because the strength of it was unbelievable. And I don't know that, like, I've had young people from my kids' friends or whomever coming by, or you're with them and they say, "Oh, yeah, I'm on acid." And I'm thinking to myself, we couldn't have looked or talked like that if we were on acid in our day. You would be
Exactly.
drooling.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't think that the same strengths are being,
I do not know, but you're probably
oh,
right. I don't know. But I think in the study that I was in, I think it was 25 milligrams of synthetic psilocybin is what was used. And that's called, we referred to that as a heroic dose. So if you take 25 milligrams of synthetic, which I think is equivalent roughly to about 5 grams of chewing mushrooms, that you're going to have, it will have an impact.
yes.
Now, in some people, and because it was a double-blind study, we didn't know who was getting a placebo. They didn't know. Some people who got placebos had very powerful studies, experiences. So
Very interesting.
it's up to the psyche. Yeah.
Yeah.
And listening to music in a deep state of relaxation and meditation with eye shades on. People have I studied in part of grad school in the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center with Helen Bonney, who developed guided imagery with music, and people who had very powerful experiences with sort of deep meditation and music.
And
Uh,
the guided
yeah,
imagery.
and guided, yes, yeah,
Well, I know that that's true because I saw by doing it that many years later that it was nothing different than all the experiences I'd been having without any drugs.
yes, yeah, yeah,
So I know that to really be true. I
yeah,
I myself, my therapist was the one who gave me MDMA to try.
right.
And I came back to him and I said, there was nothing. I had not, I thought it was, all I kept thinking was, this is it. And
Mhm.
he said to me, I realize your heart is so open that this is something that affects that. And that's why it didn't affect you at all.
Right. That's what I was going to say. Yes. Yeah. And I
It's
think
so,
the psychedelics really open us up. If we're already open, well,
that's,
maybe,
yeah.
maybe it doesn't have the effect. Yeah.
Uh, there's a channel called Vice Network, I think, and there's a show called Leaping Lizards, something or other. There's not other titles like Leaping Lizard,
Yeah.
and it's the story of the origination of the MDMA and Sasha
Mm.
Shulgin and his partner, who never spoke about it until his 90s. They were both experimenting in labs together,
Mm.
and I've actually, they've been to my home here before in the days before they passed on, not Sasha Shulgin, but his wife, and all of those people that came here in these late ages of life had such brilliant minds and as sharp and as clear as can be. So I want to put it out there that, people used to say, oh, if they take LSD or this happens, then their mind later is going to bad, whatever's going to happen. All I can say is that I saw people in my home and many of them, and they were as brilliant and as sharp and as amazing
Mm.
as could be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that would be, to me, a positive effect of the things that they had done,
Yeah. Right.
in that psychedelic era.
Yeah. I went to a conference last year in outside of Santa Barbara on Jungian analysis and psychedelics. And the consensus was that psychedelics uh, were at their best when someone is stuck psychotherapeutically or stuck with the problems in their lives. It can move them along. So I think part of what's going to happen in the future is that it will be among, part of the arsenal of moving people through individuation on their journey, and when they're stuck, gives them the nudge that they need.
Yes, and if they do it with guidance, which of course as
Yes.
teenagers we didn't have,
Oh
we
boy.
just, everybody was like, okay, let's do this and listen
Yeah.
to music. But to
Right.
be able to have guides can be
Yes.
very powerful. And then maybe they only need one experience to get through the trauma that has put them in the depression that they're in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so that sounds like really wonderful work that you've been involved in. Have you talked anything? I just learned about something, I guess, in therapy that's been around for 25 years, but I never knew about it, called post-traumatic growth, about the
Yes.
growths, because I
Yeah.
realize you've done a lot of work also with people with trauma.
Right.
So do you find
Yes.
that also?
Yeah. I wrote an article about, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago that for some reason is getting a lot of people are reading now. Uh, let's see, it's called Trauma and Transformative Passage.
Mhm.
And the gist of it is that uh, what trauma does, it prepares us for a therapeutic psychological death. Any initiation ceremony with indigenous people or any kind of positive initiation entails a death and rebirth experience. And that often happens with psychedelics. People do experience a death, a letting go of ego, and then and then coming to life in a different way. So trauma, one of the problems with trauma is that when someone is traumatized, often medicine of today or psychiatry today uh, uh, just uh, uh, inhibits the movement forward by giving medications, maybe antipsychotics that just don't let the person don't let them die. Now, PTSD is very, very serious, and suicide can be a tremendous risk. But with guidance and within a psychotherapeutic framework, uh, the person can be allowed to examine what about my life needs to die, and what needs to be born, and how can we go about helping that happen. So the answer to your question is yes.
I I I was 21 when I was giving birth to my first child,
Mm.
and uh, apparently I was dying of preeclampsia and toxemia.
Oh,
And I didn't know because I'd never seen a doctor. And I was, we were living our hippie life out here in Northern California. And my dad was going to deliver the baby because he delivered my last brother. And people all around here were having babies left and right in their houses. And he said, of course you can do this, 1, 2, 3. And that's not really what happened.
uh,
And, but that was what I experienced and yelled out in the middle of the ICU when they were going to take me into delivery was, I said, after they gave me drugs that brought me back into my body because I was out of my body, looking at everything happening because I was in
right.
that two veils or the two worlds. I said,
Yes.
yell out in the middle of the delivery, oh my God, this is just like LSD. Because I was feeling the dying and the birthing.
Yes.
And it was just like, I mean, I was actually physically doing it, but
Yes.
remembering the LSD trips from the 5 years earlier when I was experiencing life and death as an ego death, but I didn't know that.
Right. Yeah.
And so later, when they wanted to give me some very powerful drugs to knock me out after the birth, because I would have seizures, they said,
Uh,
I said, well, I don't know if I want to take anything that powerful. I'm not used to taking, I don't even take aspirins or. He said
right.
to me, you took LSD. So I said, okay.
Yeah. Very funny.
But it was very interesting because had I not taken that drug, I would not have been able to associate that same feeling.
Right.
And uh it was nothing I ever wanted to, it's not like I was dying to do psychedelics. A lot of people are doing this. I have never been drawn to that, but I feel very good to have had the experiences to have learned
Yeah.
from them.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Uh so I have a couple of more questions here. I just want to go back a little bit um about your book and about getting it out and what you're thinking about. Like, are you thinking about maybe going and speaking in some high schools or doing any of this kind of thing? I know you haven't thought about marketing, But if you have a little gem here that
Uh,
it's like some of my podcasts, I feel like, it's nothing to do for money. I'm not doing this for any kind of fame or fortune. All I'm doing this for is to help people that if they listen to the
yes.
show and they get some kind of a healing, or they hear of someone else that they should contact, or whatever it
Yeah.
does to help
Right.
someone, I feel like, since I'm not a therapist and I don't have a license to do those kind of things, whatever I can do in this method is a way of reaching people.
Yeah.
And this is a very wonderful thing and a wonderful way to do this. But I've only got, 1,300 people. I would love for other people to have, these shows we have with incredible traumas and people sharing their healing. It would
Yes.
be such a wonderful thing for others to hear these things. So how do we get your message out, or how do we get out this idea that young people don't, and also it could help a child, or say a 13 or 14-year-old reading your book, that might take them to a place more of positivity than maybe going and joining a gang or going and doing something negative.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about marketing, and this is my first marketing effort. This podcast is it. And again, I just would like people to be able to read it, so that's my. I think I've given more away than I've sold. It's on
Mhm.
Amazon, and every once in a while I get a royalty check for $3.94 or something like that. But that's not the idea. I've had my career, and I'm very happy with how it went. So I'd like to get it out. And I very much appreciate your having me on and doing and letting people know it's there.
Well, I'm not a marketing person because I don't know how to do this with my podcast either, but I'm thinking about things for you.
Yeah, wow. I am open, believe me.
And I think maybe it's middle school. Maybe the age is at the edge of middle school before they go to high school, where they're going to get traumatized.
Yes, yes, yes,
That might be and of course, it takes energy to go around and go and speak at some of these kinds of things, but it
right,
might be, I don't know, this very wealthy man in Nevada, in Las Vegas, he published these. You can't see them, it's in the corner there, but he was very wealthy, so that's different that he can have all the money he needs to do this.
right.
He published all the different submitted papers from around the world of people about consciousness after death.
Ah,
And they're very beautiful books, and he offered them free to the different people that were in different
yeah,
shows and things like
yeah.
this. But he sent them around the country to hospices and places where people are working with death.
Ah,
And I
wonderful.
thought, what a beautiful thing to access this information to
Mm,
people who are sitting there working directly with the dying people.
that's great.
And so that I'm only sharing that and thinking that now, how's there a way of sharing something like what you're
Yeah,
doing?
right, right. Yeah,
Uh,
people have colleagues and friends have had the same remark, and I said, well, little by little, it's getting out. I said, it's not viral. It's more like a low-grade infection at this point. Uh, but I'd like it to be a little, a little higher grade, and we'll see what happens.
yes. So we were talking about, there was some things I was reading in our prep sheet about legacies, and
Yeah,
what a grandparent's legacy is, or what the legacy for your grandchildren is. And I
right.
was wondering if we could talk a little bit about legacy and what that means. What's the importance of the transmittable legacy of life guidance for grandparents or anyone to pass on to their loved ones?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have a responsibility to pass on what we've learned. And most of what we've learned the hard way. At least I have. And they're hard-won lessons. And can we pass on something? So maybe our grandchildren, they'll have their own hard-won lessons, but maybe they can learn a little bit from from what we have done. And I spent some time, as you know, in the book with how to make decisions, how to know if something's right, how to know if it's wrong, those sort of things. But I think that's the responsibility that we have as human beings, especially as grandparents. that were this connection to the spiritual world. Um, yeah, that's a very good question.
And the spiritual world, you know, for some children, depending which family they grew up in, it may be a completely new concept that they have never
Oh,
been heard
yes,
of, or
absolutely.
it may have only come to them from some necessary, not, maybe like some particularly strong religious teaching that didn't allow for these other pieces to come in.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
This whole business of an other, of a other source of consciousness or collective unconsciousness, consciousness, as Jung would have said, that's that's that can be new and exciting from I mean some of the kids that I've meet they sort of done it all like at age 14 they've traveled around the world or they've played every video game, they've TikToked themselves into hysteria, but there's the idea that there's a whole other dimension of life uh, to 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 become acquainted with and to welcome and to follow. I think can be very exciting. And kids like to be excited.
I have to say that, and I can say that I think that this is also true of some of the recent guests I've had on my podcast when they've shared what type of childhood pain and trauma they've been through, that those children often are immediately
I, I've lost your audio for a second.
you said so. Oops,
There it goes.
touched a button. There we go. I wanted to say that children who've been traumatized, some of them know what the inner voice and place is because that's what saved them when they
Yes,
went through their trauma.
yes, yes.
And I will hear them say that in podcasts that we've had.
Mm,
That's where their spiritual life started to develop because they were in a dark basement or a dungeon or some sort of horrific place
right.
that offered them no relief, and the relief they started to realize came from inside themselves.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's only like in later years where some people might have tried to deny that any of those things happened to shut that off or from the trauma, that they forget about their inner world. But that inner
right.
world is where we go when we are lost.
Yeah,
And it's a very comforting and good guiding place. And I didn't know of this, that that's what was happening when we were children. But now,
yes.
adult, and I look back, I know now that those are the things that saved me from different traumatic experiences. Some
Right,
people
right,
by ourselves, some people call them angels. But I really think we should maybe give a little credit to our own inner self, that maybe
yeah,
our inner self was the one that was helping to guide us as
right,
well.
right. And if we can say to younger people that those that inner voice or whatever we want to call it, uh, it that's wonderful and it's okay. It can be frightening to some people. What uh, that there's sort of an inner direction or inclination that seems strange, and
Or a therapist. I remember telling a therapist when I was 13 that I saw things that aren't there, and
yeah,
that I hear voices telling me things. And that put me directly on the schizophrenic line, I think, or
yeah,
something. I don't know. They
yeah,
wanted to put me on drugs, and
right,
I
yeah,
did, I didn't end up doing that, but I, thought they had the great advice because they were the adults, and I tried their drugs for a week, and I said, "There's no way
uh,
would I ever take these drugs. It made
right,
me have no feelings. Why would I want to do that?" So I'm so glad therapy's so different, 55 years later than when I was taking it, and they would
yeah,
you couldn't have those voices and you couldn't have those things.
mm,
So it's
yeah.
wonderful there are therapists like you and many of the psychologists I've met here who don't squash that in the person.
No, we have to nurture it.
Right. In
Yeah.
fact, I have a sign here uh from one of my guests that says be uh to always welcome in your inner voice, and
Uh,
always to listen to your inner voice and how
yeah.
important and powerful the inner voice is. So I like to leave a little plaque of it up to remind ourselves, because sometimes we forget.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And so you have a wonderful relationship then with your grandchildren and your grandson to be able to share this beautiful book with him. So
Yeah,
that must make you feel really good inside.
it does. Yeah, thank you.
And so let me just quickly see if there's any other questions here. Um, did we talk about the generational traumas that get passed from grandparents and great grandparents, and some of them that we see and some that we don't?
Mhm.
We can like I know we carry the DNA of our ancestors, but
Yeah,
I think we also might carry some of their generational traumas that we don't even know that we're experiencing.
yeah, yeah.
Did you find that in therapy with working with people?
Yes, and that took a lot of exploration and sort of sorting out what is from the past, from my grandparent, and what is mine, and what can I learn from that, and do I have to repeat what was what my grandparents went through? There are a lot of questions there, uh,
Hmm.
and a lot of opportunities too. To,
Yes.
yeah.
I just remember as a child, I didn't understand what living through World War I was and World War II
Uh,
and coming to Ellis Island. You know, you're just a kid. I
oh,
didn't
yeah.
understand my adult years when they were long gone. But I always remembered as a child that when I looked in their eyes, my grandma and grandpa that had immigrated had a pain in their eyes that I never saw in the other people's eyes. And that was
Yeah,
the only thing that I noticed as a child that was different, that you could feel like, and it just was in their eyes. You could not take
yeah,
away what they had seen and been through.
right. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, that in itself is some good, important reason for grandparents to connect to their grandchildren and explain.
Right. And really, no matter how traumatic the legacy, the lineal legacy is, keeping a person company with it. So very often in therapy or otherwise, the most important thing is not to say, I will cure this for you, but you're not going to be alone in this.
Right.
We're going to go through this together. And I think with grandchildren, with anyone, if we can be a companion to a person's suffering, and Jung sort of famously said, let's see if I can get it right, that he said a psychoneurosis, which was the word of his day, is suffering in search of a purpose. So when we find out, when we can come to terms and identify, there's something in this for me of going through this suffering. There's something very important here. There's a purpose and a meaning. Then uh, recovery recovery is not too far away.
Hmm. That's beautiful. So I'm coming upon our hour now of talking, and
Yeah,
I know you're in uh, for all our listeners and any of our YouTube watchers, we're
yeah,
very lucky to have him here today because he lost some internet. So we're
right.
doing this from an
I'm in my
internet
car.
place in a car. Yes. So I know the visuals aren't as sharp as they should be, but the audio is excellent.
Good.
And so this is the time when I'd like to know if there's any other stories or things you would like to share. And if there's any piece of advice or any websites or any sites you think people should check out or any information you want to give to our listeners.
Well, I think that again, talking about inner direction and synchronicities in particular, uh, the fact that through this podcast I met you is very important, and
Yes.
I think what you're doing is so important and wonderful, and I hope we can stay in touch.
Well,
Thank you very much for having me.
I want to thank you so much for being here. And your show is going to air in between three different shows that are all about incredible traumas. So I
Oh,
feel like our show together today is going to be the soothing show
okay, I hope so.
in between the other shows of sharing of such intensity of stories.
Oh,
There's also these kind of more, a positive story about what we
good,
can do for our future, laying
good.
out a book of information, of guidance, of things to share with young people as they're growing up.
Yeah, yeah.
And I really do hope you do a part two, if
Well,
you feel like
okay,
it.
we'll see. Maybe you'll write the part too.
Oh, maybe me. Okay. So I want to thank you so much for being with us here today and also for not canceling the show after you lost
Oh,
your
oh
internet.
boy, boy.
That
And I
was
want, yeah. And let
that
me
was
also thank again Gene Fox for connecting us and for Stanley Krittmer for being himself.
yes, he's
Yeah.
the treasured human beings that I'm so
Yes.
grateful to have in our lives.
Good. Good.
Oh, yes. Thank you. So I
Okay.
want to thank all you listeners for joining us here today, for liking, subscribing, sharing, commenting, and for following us on this journey. We hope that you get some tidbits of information that help you on your healing journey. So remember, listeners, stories can heal. So share your stories and have a wonderful week. Bye.